All right, hey everyone, welcome to this month Visual Builder Office Hours. This month we're going to cover the new features in Visual Builder Studio, the release that we put out last month in December. That's also internally known as release 2201. My name is Shai Schmelzer. I'm part of the Oracle Visual Builder product management team. And also on the line, we have Laura, Brian, and Murtaza, who are monitoring the Q&A panel. So during this session, if at any point of time you have any questions, there's the Q&A area in the Zoom. You can feel free to post your questions over there, and my colleagues would be happy to help during the session. If anything would be left over, I'm going to try and address other questions also at the end, but don't wait until the end to post your questions. In any case, what we're going to cover today is what is new in Visual Builder, specifically in Visual Builder Studio in the latest release. And actually in this release, we introduced some very big new changes and capabilities. So let's get started. So first of all, this release is only available as part of Visual Builder Studio. So hopefully by this point of time, you all know that Visual Builder Studio is a more comprehensive development environment on top of Visual Builder. It gives you a lot of tools to collaborate with your team members, to manage your whole development cycle. And specifically when you're working with visual application, it gives you much better integration with Git. So the ability to manage your code with a Git repository. And it also gives you the ability to automate your CI/CD process, your continuous integration, continuous delivery of applications across multiple instances. In general, we view Visual Builder Studio as a better way to develop Visual Builder application, and Visual Builder Studio is something you get for free if you already have a Visual Builder account, or in fact, if you have any Oracle Cloud account, you can spin up Visual Builder Studio for free. And then you can plug this Visual Builder Studio to work on top of your Visual Builder or Oracle Integration Cloud instances. So if you have Visual Builder, since last month, you actually already got version 2201 with a bunch of the features that we're going to talk about next. If you're not using Visual Builder Studio, you would need to wait for the next upgrade of Visual Builder Studio or Oracle Integration Cloud to what we call release 2204. This is expected to start next month in February, and then you would get the features that we're going to talk about today, along with some other new features that we'll probably talk about in the next month's webcast in the features of 2204. Probably the session that we are doing today should have been done last month, but because of the Christmas vacation and a lot of people being off, we decided to postpone it to this week. Right, so some of the things to be aware of that are new in this release. So first of all, client libraries. With every new release of Visual Builder, we are providing you with an updated of the JET libraries that we're using, and also with a new VB runtime set of library. Those are the libraries that actually run on your client side. And this release is no different. In this release, we upgraded to use Oracle JET release 11.0. Okay? And VB runtime matches the version of the VB that we're using, so 2201. Remember that to use those libraries, this is in your control. Okay, you decide when to upgrade your application to use this new set of libraries. It's done in your application setting. There's an upgrade button. You can press on it and will automatically upgrade your application to pick up the latest libraries. Just like before, with the new release, we always support the current release and the two previous releases. So we don't force you to upgrade with every release, although we do recommend it, but you do need to keep up to speed with our releases. And it's basically giving you kind of half a year to about a little bit more than that to do an update of your application. Okay. So with this release, the latest release that you can be on, or the oldest release that you can be on, is 2107. If you're on a version before that, you would need to upgrade your application in order to work with the visual editor. You would see a screen that looks like the area that you see over here, indicating that your application needs an upgrade. Go to your application setting and do the upgrade. And we recommend that you upgrade to the latest version. Okay. One thing to remember, if you're using the Oracle SAS theme for your application, what we call the SAS 13, this blue type of UI, or in fact, any template or skin that is based on the Alta look and feel, you also need to upgrade those. So we have a new version of the SAS template, basically matching Jet 11 and VB Runtime 2201 out there on GitHub, where you can go over, download the new version, and upgrade your application as well. This would guarantee that your application continue to look and feel the same as before. One thing that we wanted to raise here for your awareness, as you are probably know, for a while now, Oracle Jet has been using the new Redwood-based theme for new applications. This is also the default when you create a new application right now in Visual Builder. Alta was the previous theme that we're using, and we'll continue to support Alta in release 11. It's also included in release 12 of Jet, but release 13 of Oracle Jet is no longer going to have Alta in the set of libraries over there. So if you're expecting to want to continue to develop and upgrade your application when Jet 13 comes out, one thing that you should be starting to plan on is transitioning your application from using Alta-based look and feel and Alta themes to using the Redwood theme. This is not like, technically it's just switching the theme, but because Redwood has a different sizing for object, you might also be required to do some adjustment to the user interface, to reposition things, but functionality, it should still work the same. So start to plan for some time in the next year, where you would take your application, if you're Alta-based, and transition it to be Redwood-based. Again, you probably have at least a year to do this upgrade from now, but we wanted to give you a head start so you can better plan for the future. In any case, open up Visual Builder, your application in the new Visual Builder Studio, click the upgrade button, and then you'll be able to start to take advantage of the features that we have in the new release. And one of the key features is something we call Fragments. And again, if you are not upgrading your runtime libraries to the latest release, you won't have Fragments as something that you'll even see in your development environment. So if you open your application in Visual Builder Studio in the new version and you don't see Fragments, that's probably because you didn't upgrade your client libraries. Right, so what are fragments? Fragments are a huge architectural change that allows you to add a lot more reusability, modularity, and manageability to the application as you build it. Fragments are basically reusable sections that you can put on various pages. And you can develop this reusable section and use it all across your application in multiple pages. So when you develop a fragment, you define it at the application level. Okay, so it's reusable across your flows in different pages. And what you basically build is you build a section of your page, which includes the user interface. It includes the variables that are connected to the user interface. It includes all the actions and events that are connected to this user interface, and whatever JavaScript that you need. It's basically kind of like a complete page, but it's just a section that you can then stick inside other pages, basically embed them into other pages, using a new component that we have in the component palette called Fragment Container. So you basically drag a fragment container into a page, and inside this fragment container, you can place another fragment that you developed somewhere else. Okay. Because of that capability, this allows you to take things that you have in multiple places in your application. Okay. Maybe you have some dialogue that is very frequently used. Maybe you have a table of data or a form that is used in multiple places across your application. Instead of having a copy of it in each one of the pages, you develop one instance of it, one fragment of it, okay? And then you just embed it into all the pages where you need it to be. Now, one of the things is that in different pages, you might want this fragment to behave differently. And to do that, we give you the ability to pass parameters into the fragments, and the parameters control, or you can use the parameters to control the behavior and what you show and how you do things in the fragment based on information that you get from the outside. Okay, so the containing page can pass parameters into the fragment to influence its behavior. We also support the reverse approach, which is the fragment can also notify the containing page about events that happened inside the fragment. So for example, if you press the button inside the fragment and you want to notify the containing page that you did this, you can do that using events, and the events can have payloads that contain data that you pass from the fragment to the containing page. So basically, between the page that embeds the fragment and the fragments, you have two-way communication channel that allows you to easily pass information back and forth. Now, with this fragment, the other thing that you get here is the ability to increase your modularity and manageability. So in a case where you have multiple developers that are working together on the same application and potentially on the same page, if one developer works on a fragment that is then embedded into the page, it's less likely that they would have any conflicts with the other developer that is working on the page itself. Okay, this basically allows us to break down the work of our development team, so each member works on a fragment instead of all of them working on the single page, and thus reducing the amount of conflicts that people might have when both people are working on the same code base. Okay. And again, modularity, this ability to take those components and develop them as a standalone components and manage them that way gives you better control over the overall development cycle. So this is a great new feature. It's been requested by a lot of our customers for quite a long time, and now we have those capabilities in the product, and we highly encourage you to start using them. Basically, look at your application when you're planning it, identify areas of the application or things that are repeating in your application in multiple places, and extract them into fragments and then embed them into the places that you need. Another new feature that we have is the data palette. So a lot of the development in Visual Builder has been UI first. So you basically drag a table into the page and then you bind the table to data, or you drag a bunch of UI components onto the page, you arrange them on the page, and then you go to each one of the components and you bind it, set the value to point to a variable that you have them. Okay. What we now offer is also a data-first approach to development. So inside the designer, you would now see something called the data palette. And the data palette allows you to drag and drop your business object and your REST services into the page. And then it would show you the ability to create tables and forms on top of those endpoints. Okay. So for example, if you take a business object and you drag it into a page, you'll be able to create a table that shows all the values from that business object, or it will allow you to create an insert form, an update form, or just a detail form. Okay. This speeds up the way that you create, especially forms, okay? Because tables were kind of easy to bound before, but when you were working with forms, in a lot of cases, you would first create all the object on the UI and then bind them to the variables, unless you started from a table and then used the quick start, okay? And now it's very easy to create a form very quickly based on an existing REST service or business object, okay? The data palette works both with the regular JET components as well as with the components that are the dynamic components from Oracle JET. Okay, so in both cases, we know how to work with it. If you added the dynamic components into your application, you'll simply get more options showing up when you drag and drop things onto your page. So again, this is something that would speed up the way that you create user interfaces and will simplify a lot of the data binding that previously you would needed to do manually step by step. So I'm going to demo those two things in a second, the fragments and the data palette, but I just wanted to mention one more thing. We upgraded to Oracle Jet 11 with this release. And with Oracle Jet 11, there are several new components that you can use, several new capabilities that you can use. For example, one of the very frequent requests that we got from people is the ability to freeze column in a table. So when you're doing horizontal scrolling, have a column that sticks at the beginning of the table while you scroll the rest, or have a column that sticks at the end of the table while you scroll the rest. So this is a new built-in capability in Oracle Jet 11. If you're upgrading to Oracle Jet 11, you can basically apply it to each one of the tables that you have where you need it. There's also a new component called pop-up drawer. Our avatar component, for example, now can be either in a shape of a square or a circle, and a bunch of other things that are new in Oracle Jet that you can read about in the Oracle Jet release notes. One of the key things that is new in Jet 11 is something we call the stable theme. It's also called inside Visual Builder, you'll see it as Redwood stable theme. And the idea there is that this is the theme that you want to enhance if you want to modify the Redwood look and feel. Okay, so let me explain that. The Redwood look and feel is the standard look and feel that Oracle adopts for our future-based SaaS application. Okay, so some of those applications are already released, but this is also the look and feel for all the future and upcoming applications that we're developing. Okay, and it's UI patterns and designs and fonts and sizes and colors that are all standardized across the Oracle offering. And you can use the Redwood theme in your application. So if you're happy with the design efforts and the design concept that the people inside Oracle created, that our UI expert created, you can simply leverage it, just use the Redwood theme. It's also very useful if you're building extensions to Oracle SaaS and you want to keep the same look and feel as Oracle SaaS, then use the Redwood. Now, the thing with the Redwood specs are that they are evolving over time, and sometimes things change. Sometimes we add some nice UIs. For example, now if you're looking into a dialogue, there's a kind of a bar color up there at the top. And it's all things that we evolve as part of the Redwood UI. If you're based on the Redwood UI, when we're upgrading our Redwood standards with a new version of Jet, those would automatically be applied to your application. However, if you want to divert or take another route from the Redwood UI and maybe customize it and change some things, you wouldn't want our upgrade to automatically change your theming, your changes. Okay, and override them. And this is where the stable theme come into play. With a stable theme, we basically give you a theme that you can override, and we're promising you that we're not going to override the changes that you did. Okay, so bottom line, if you are modifying the Redwood look and feel, you should be modifying based on the Redwood stable theme. You go into your application setting, you choose Redwood stable, and then if you need to, you can also create an override of that stable theme and do the changes over there. Okay, so those were three things. Actually, let me cover. Okay, we'll cover those three things. Let's switch over from the slides and into a demo, and we'll show you fragments, data binding, and a couple of other things in our application. So we're here over inside Visual Builder Studio. By the way, again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A tab at the top and not the chat. The Q&A would allow us to reply and have other people see the answers as well. All right, so we're inside Visual Builder Studio. If you're looking in my application setting, I set my application setting to work on the 2201 and release 1107 of Jet, which now means that I have this fragment section over here. Okay, and as you can see, this is at the application level in parallel to all our flows and pages. So what I'm going to show you is how you can build a nice new fragment. And we're going to create the employee fragment. Okay. So when I open a new fragment, it opens up with the same visual designer that you're used to when you're designing a page. But you can notice that we don't have the surrounding aspect that comes from the shell page, okay? Because this area is not going to be its own page, it's going to be embedded into other pages. So you have kind of a nice clean area to show things. And now you can basically drag and drop things over here. So for example, you can, just like before, you can drag and drop a heading and say employees, okay? And you can make it a little smaller. Okay, and you can drag and drop component over here. One of the things that I can already show you is that there's a change in the way that we now lay out the panels over here. We have the component palette at the top, and we have the structure pane at the bottom, and you can basically adjust how big each one of them is. And one of the reasons we did it is also in order to fit this data palette that we have over here. And in the data palette over here, you can access all the services that you mapped. You can access all the business objects that you mapped. Okay, and those are then things that you can drag and drop into your application. So I'll give it a second to fetch my business object, and I can then, for example, take my employees and drag and drop them into the page. Okay. Now, when I drop them into the page, you can see that I can drop an employee as a table, as a list, as a create form. This would basically do an insert of a new employee, as an edit form, or as a detail, which is basically just fetch the detail of an employee. Okay. And the same thing can be done again with the normal Jet component or with the dynamic components that we introduced in the last version. So I'm just going to use a regular Jet table over here. So when I drag and drop, it would basically pop up the next dialog, which would show me the fields that I can choose to show in my table. So I'm going to pick up the picture, the name, salary, for example. Maybe actually, I want to show you some other capabilities. So I'll add the job and maybe the email and country, like that. All right. And we can switch the picture to be an image. So this is pretty much the same dialog that you had before with the quick start. The quick start, by the way, are still here, so you can still use the quick start to add data. But by using this data palette, we make it a little bit simpler. It's actually much more relevant for things like forms and things like that that you would do rather than table. But in our case, I need a table in my fragment. And this is my table. So one of the new things that I can do in a table for columns is I can add the property of freeze. So right now, for example, if I scroll over here, you can see that scrolling works perfectly fine, but I'm losing the name of the employee. So I can see the rest of the data, but I don't know who is the employee that is I'm actually looking at when I'm scrolling all the way to the right. So one of the things I can do now, if I switch to the code view, is I can go to specific columns in my table and I can add a property. I believe it's called freeze edge. And I can say start. Okay. So then if I go back to the live view, okay, and I scroll my table, oops, no, it wasn't that. Okay. So if you're like me and you don't remember the syntax completely, you can just go to oracle.com/jet. This would take you to our Jet homepage. You can go to the cookbook, go to the table, and look at the frozen column sample. Okay, so this would show you how this works. You can see here that we have freezing on both ends in the beginning and at the end. Okay, and of course the page itself, the demo HTML, would show you the syntax. So then you can just copy the syntax like that, go back to your application, figure out where you mistyped something and just update it over there. Okay, so I'll put this as a property here. Okay, and I'm also going to put it after the name. So I'm going to have two columns that are sticking to the beginning of the table. All right, so now if I scroll the data, you can see the picture and the name stay in place. Okay. So that's one of the new capabilities of Jet 11. Another new capability, by the way, is if we use the avatar component, we can drop the avatar over here on the first column. Okay, and map it to have the image. So pick up the picture. Okay, we can then delete the little picture over here. So the avatar component now has a new property, which is called the shape, and you can switch it from square to be a circle. It gives it a little bit more of, I guess, an iOS look and feel in some cases. All right. So we developed this detail component, fragments, called employee fragment. And now I can go over to the pages in my application. For example, I have an employee page, and I need this list of employees over there. So what I can do is I can pick up a fragment container UI component, drop it on the page, and then bind it to a fragment. By the way, I can directly create a fragment from here, but I'm going to bind it to the existing fragment. Okay, and then I basically get the whole component to show up in my page. Right? And it's not only in this page. If I have the other page here, if I have departments here, so let me show you, for example, on the department page, maybe we'll do a page that allows me to create a new department. So to do that, I'm going to take my department object, drag and drop it onto the page, and I can create it as a create form. So this would automatically map the fields that I'm interested in. So this would be like the department and the maximum salary and the manager of that department, and will create this form for me. Okay, with all the columns, all of them mapped to the correct variable, and the types are all defined for me automatically here, and also the save button. Okay. So maybe I need to also decide who's going to be the manager. And in order to decide who's going to be the manager, I want to show my employees. So who from the employees is going to be the manager? I'm going to pick up a fragment container, put it down here, for example, and into this fragment container, I'm going to use the same employee fragment. So now I can also see who from my employees I want to make the manager of this new department. Okay. Now, the nice thing here is that any change that I do now for my fragment would appear in all the pages. So for example, if I go over to my employees fragment and I add a hyperlink, we'll add the ability to select an employee. I'll drop it over here. Okay, and we'll call this one select. Okay, actually, let's change the order in the table. So we can move the select to be the first column, and we can also change the title of it. So it would say select, like that. Okay. So now when I do this change, this is going to appear in every page that uses this. So now if I look at this department page, the select is over here. And if I'm looking at the employees page, the select is over here. Okay. And I can also add functionality to the select. So when I'm working in a fragment, I can still define events and things like that on my component. So I can go over to my select and I can add an event over here. So when someone clicks this one, I want to do something. Okay. For example, I can assign a variable, okay, or something like that. Okay. Now, the other thing that sometimes happen is that not in all the pages I want the select to show up. So in the department page, I want to be able to select an employee. But when I'm looking at the list of employees, there's no need to show me the select link over here. So what I want to do is I want to conditionally show and hide this based on a parameter. So to do this, I'm going to go over to my fragment, okay? And I'm gonna take this hyperlink and I'm going to surround it with an if statement. And this if statement is going to be based on a new variable. So let's define a new variable over here. Okay, I will call this one the show select variable, and it's going to be a Boolean variable. Okay, so by default it's false, so the link is going to be hidden, but I can pass it in and set it to true, and then it would show up. So what I want to do with this variable, I want to take this variable, the show select, and I want to mark it as an input parameter, okay, for my fragment. Okay, so now if I go to a page like the department, okay, the select is going to be hidden by default because that's the default value. But you can see that when I'm standing on the fragment container, I now have the input parameter to this fragment. So I can pass a parameter that says true on show select. And then in this page, the component would show up. And on the other page, okay, it's still going to be hidden because we basically can pass, for example, false. Okay, and that would not show the select. Okay? So this is how you pass parameters into fragments. Okay. Now, we have this ability in the fragment to select an employee, right? But we need to tell the page, the containing page. Let me just set the default value here to true. So I would actually see this in my page. I'll see the component in my fragment like that. So when we're selecting an employee, we need to pass this information to the page that contains us. Okay. So we need to notify the embedding page about the event that is happening here. So we already have the event here, right? So we have the select component and there's an event here. What we're going to do in this event, instead of just assign variable, is we're going to use a fire event action. Okay. And we're going to create a new event. We're going to create a fragment event called emp selected. Okay, the employee was selected, and we're going to emit this event to the container. So this event is going to be propagated up our chain to the page that contains us, like that. Okay. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can also set a payload for the event. Okay, so the event is now defined over here. Okay, and you can add parameters to the event. So, for example, maybe we need to pass the name of the selected employee as part of this event. Okay. So now in our action chain, we have, go back to the action, we have this fire event. Okay, if we do a refresh here for a second, we would also see the payload. And we can set a value for the payload to pass in the specific data that we want. Okay, so the name that we're passing in is something that we're getting from the table. Okay, so we click on the select, there's the current row. Okay, and we need the current dot row dot name is something we're passing over in our event. Okay, now in the page that contains us, for example, in the department page, we now need to process this event. Okay, and again, this is basically the fragment can create multiple events. Each page decides which events they are going to listen to. So in the fragment over here, okay, if I go into the events tab for the fragment, I can create a new event, and you can see my specific event that I'm raising from the fragment already showing up here. Okay, and you will see all the events that the fragment fires up and are marked as propagate to container showing up here. By the way, if they are not showing up initially, just hit refresh. You might need to just refresh your page in order for events that you just defined to show up here. Anyway, we are going to process this AMP selection event. We get a payload, an input parameter, and we can, for example, use it. So, for example, we can assign this, okay, use the assign variable to take the value that we get here and place it, for example, as the manager for our new department. All right. So now we got our little application working. And if I run this, we should have basically our fragment embedded in two places, showing up differently. So over here, we just have a list of employees with the ability to scroll their information as needed. In the departments page, we can create a new department. Okay, so we can, for example, create the sales department with a maximum salary of 1, 2, 3, 4. And for a manager, we can select someone and get their information to show up over here. Again, just by clicking here in the fragment, getting the information over here, clicking save will create this new department in our business object, and the data is there. So this is basically a little bit about fragments, along with some of the other stuff like tables and avatars and things like that. Maybe show you one more thing while we're here. When we're working with the data palette, as I mentioned, it makes it very easy to work with creating forms and things like that. For example, if I needed to work with a REST service that returns countries, which is something I use in a lot of my videos, let's add, for example, an input component where I can specify a country code. So we'll add a create variable, we'll call it the country code. Okay. And I have a REST service over here that returns country information. Okay, I can actually expand it and look at the endpoints. Okay, and then I can just drag this into my page, okay, and create a detail page. Okay, because this gets me a country. I can choose all the fields that I want to show. Again, the nice thing here is that I didn't need to go over and create the type and then create the variable and then create everything else. I can basically just go over, drag the endpoint, and this helps me create everything else. This endpoint accepts a parameter, the code, so I'm going to pass in the country code like that. Click finish. And now basically if we switch to live mode and we type US, we get information, for example, about the United States. And again, you can then go over and you can modify whatever was created over here. For example, you can take the avatar component, place it, for example, over here. And just like before, the variables are still available for you. So you can pick up the variable called flag for this one. And then, for example, if you do NZ, you'll get the flag of New Zealand. If you do AU, you get Australia, things like that. Whatever you do here. So this is, again, how simple the data palette makes it to create your user interface just by dragging and dropping. Again, one of the new features over here. By the way, okay, let's go back to the slides. We'll cover some more things in slides, and then we'll come back to some additional demos. Visual Builder Studio, we added a couple of new features in terms of integration with Visual Builder beyond the things you already saw. One of the things is the ability to define backends for your environments. So if you're familiar with the concept of backends in Visual Builder, that's how you define connection to Oracle SaaS instances, to Oracle integration instances, or to other catalog of services. You can do this directly in the Visual Builder instances or Oracle Integration Cloud instances themselves. But now you can also do this directly from inside Visual Builder Studio interface. So if we go back into Visual Builder Studio, into the interface over here, and you look at your environment, one of the things that you can now define for an environment is a backend. So you can go over, select your instance, and then define the backends directly from here. Okay, this would pop up basically the same interface that you're used to from Visual Builder, but now done directly from this environment, and you can define your new backends connecting to various backends over here. So this is one of the new features. The other new feature is Gitigno. So when you're working inside your environment, there's the Git tab over here where you would see all the pages and files that you modified. Okay. Up until now, when you did a commit, okay, you could have chosen which files you want to commit. And for example, if there was an image that you didn't want to include or some other file that for some reason you didn't want to include in your Git, you could have gone over and unchecked it. Okay, and then this file wouldn't be checked in. But you would need to remember to do it every time that you do a commit. Now you can actually go over to a specific file and you can hit ignore. And then this file is becoming part of the Gitigno spec. And whenever you do commit now, this file is not going to be included. Okay, so this is another new functionality that we introduce into the Visual Builder Studio environment and the capabilities over here. A few other enhancements in the development experience. In the page designer, we have a new placement for palettes. We have something called a breadcrumb. We have the ability to insert component and also to define enum variables. So let me show you those. And we also have the flow diagram with a property inspector. So let me show you those things in the environment. So when you're clicking around in your application, let me pick up, let's say, maybe this, no, actually the department page would be okay for this one. We have the ability to click on items in the design view, okay? And then over here, you can see at the bottom the breadcrumb of where this component is. So if I clicked on a specific field, this field, for example, you can see that this field is part of a form, and then it makes it very easy to select the whole form or to select the whole cell that it is contained and then resize this, for example. Okay. So those type of things are very useful in terms of navigating over here. Again, for example, you can click on the form layout and then go directly and set it to have 2 columns, right? And set it like that. So this is the breadcrumb. We have, as we said before, the components palette, the structure palette, and the data palette. You can resize them as needed. You can also show and hide them. So if you don't want to see the structure, you just click over here. If you don't want to see the component, you can hide it like that. Again, switch between those two, okay, and enable the structure over here. The other thing we mentioned is in data types, there's a new data type that you can define, okay, which is enumerated data type. Okay. So let's create, for example, an animal data type. And then the animal data type can have specific values. So an animal can be, let's say, a cat or a dog or a cow. Okay, so we have specific values that are allowed for this data type over here. If I created an empty one, move this one. Now, if I go over and I create a variable based on that data type, okay, I'll call it my animal, which is based on this data type. Okay. In the default values, I have a list that I can choose one of the allowed values over here. Okay. This is the extent of what enumeration do in this version of Visual Builder Studio, but we're going to leverage enumeration in more places and to enhance your development experience in later versions of Visual Builder as well. So this is just the beginning of this new thing called enumeration over here. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to show you here is the insert component capability. For example, if you're standing, again, let's look at the department page and look at the designer. You can actually stand on a specific component, right click on it and say insert component in specific slots or before, after, or inside. So I can say I need a new component before the manager, Okay, and I can add, for example, another input text before that one. Okay. So that's basically one capability that we have over here. I'm not sure what's going on right now. It's a little slow right now. Hopefully I didn't lose the network connection. This insert component is available not just in the visual designer, it's also something that you can leverage in the structure pane. So you can go over, for example, over here in the structure pane and do the same operation of insert component before and insert component there. Okay. Like that. And it's also available, I believe, from here. Yeah, so you can also do it directly from here. So this is the insert component capability. Might not be able to insert inside the form. Anyway, so this is another new thing that we have here. We did a bunch of enhancement to the dynamic components. I'm not sure how many of you are using the dynamic components. If you're not using them and you're interested to learn about them, we did an office hour about dynamic components a couple of months ago. You can find them on the replays that we have on our YouTube channel. And they basically allow you to create tables and forms that dynamically change what they show based on conditions. In the latest release of the dynamic component, we added something called suggested fields. So those are a list of fields that are going to show up by default for you in various places. We now create validators. We default them based on the type, so making it easier and faster to create validators with the correct type of validator based on your field. We have a new expression validator for fields, and we also allow you to specify sorting and sizing for columns in dynamic tables. So again, enhancement to those components are in there. And Visual Builder Studio, it's important to remember, it's not just about visual application development. There's also a bunch of DevOps capabilities in there. A couple of the new things that we added, if you're working with Oracle integration, we support now Oracle integration, continuous integration and continuous delivery for those. We did this from the previous version as well. You were able to export and import integrations. In the new versions, you can also export and import packages of integrations. So a lot of the people who are developing integrations are putting a lot of related integration into a package, and then you can manage the whole package in one go. So instead of having to export and import each integration individually, you can export and import the whole package in one step. So this is an enhancement you'll find there. Another enhancement we have is for dynamically defining parameters in a build job and add parameters dynamically at runtime. When you run the build job, we can read a file where you have a bunch of parameters and their values and pick those up and use them in the build job. We can also export parameters from one build job into the next build job in a pipeline. I just published a blog entry that shows how to do those two things. If you're interested in learning more about those, it's on the VBCS blog. One of the other things that we introduced in Visual Builder Studio that relates to build jobs is the ability to export a build job definition into a YAML file. So for a while now, we've been supporting the ability to define build jobs and pipelines using YAML. So you either do it visually with a declarative UI that you're seeing on the screen right now, or you can also have a YAML file that defines the steps in your build job. Now you can take a build job that you define declaratively and with a single command line, export it into a YAML file that you can then use to control and replicate and manage other build jobs as well. There's a bunch of other features that we added on the DevOps side. For example, SonarQube integration, we had this for a while. We focused initially for SonarQube on reviewing Java code, but you and many others are using JavaScript and Node.js code. You can now run SonarQube on top of JavaScript code to validate your code based on the roles that are defined in your SonarQube. And we have a documented way of how to do this and publish the results so you can actually access the code audit that it's done on your code. And we now have the ability to control who can create projects in Visual Builder Studio. You can assign it to specific people. We improved the way that you can connect to our NPM registry by allowing you not just to use basic oath, but also to use token-based oath. And we also did some changes to the way that you use SSH to access proxy build VMs. And so you can read about those features and others in our What's New documentation. So as you can see, we did a lot of work in this release. It's been there for basically a month and a bit now for a lot of you already out there. If you haven't played with those new features and you want to learn more, docs.oracle.com is of course the place to go over. We have the Visual Builder Studio documentation over there. There's a specific book that is called New Feature or What's New. You can go over there and we have links to the detail about each one of the new features and some of the other features that we didn't have time to cover today. We always recommend reading the What's New document when a new release comes out. If you have any questions about any of those features or you're working with them and you're running into issues, we have our Cloud Customer Connect forum. Recently, they've been upgraded to a new platform. You can directly access them by going to the help menu inside your Visual Builder environment. Just click Help, Forums, and you'll get to our Visual Builder or Visual Builder Studio forums where you can ask questions, and a bunch of us from the PM team are over there helping, answering questions. And we also see a lot of other users and peers helping each other on the forum, which is a great thing. People posting examples of things they did. It's always useful for other people. For the key new features, we also published some blogs on blogs.oracle.com/vbcs. So you can go over to this blog and see entries about the fragments, about the data palette, about parameters in build jobs, and other new features. By the way, one of the things that was enhanced on our blog recently is the addition of RSS feed. So if you're using an RSS reader, you want to get notified whenever there's a new blog entry from us, just sign up for this RSS feed on our blogging platform. Another way to get updates about everything that is new in Visual Builder is to join our LinkedIn group. So if you're on LinkedIn, go search the Oracle Visual Builder group and just join our group. We are very close to having 400 members of people like you on this list. We post every new thing that we're doing, every new blog, every new event, we post them over there. There's other people posting tips and tricks and blogs that they write. And there's also job postings over there for people or companies that are looking for Visual Builder developers to join them. So we would love to have you join that group. Just go over and look it up on LinkedIn. And that's all we had to cover today. Next month, we're going to have another VB office hours. It's likely going to be about the features of the next version. That's what happens with the end of the year and people going on vacation. We cram a lot of things into a short time frame. Let's go over and see if we have any questions on the Q&A channel that we still need to answer. All right, I think that's all we had time for today. Again, we're looking forward for meeting you all in our next seminar next month. And in the meantime, join us on our forum and ask any other questions you have. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.